Welcome everyone. Hello and welcome to another edition of IATEFL Live. And we are so very grateful that you've joined us today in this special edition of our IATEFL Live show. My name is Georgia Papamichailidou. I'm the chair of the IATEFL Digital Committee and one of the IATEFL trustees. And I'm also delighted to welcome you to a show where we have got some very special guests. Now, before I invite people to the show, I want to share with you something personal. And this is my journey through inclusive practices. It is very important for me to create environments where both our learners and our staff members feel welcome. But it's not just about June. It's not just about the Pride Month. It is about welcoming everyone throughout the year and make everyone feel safe. And through this show, you will be able to listen to beautiful stories, tips, advice on how you can make your own classrooms, your own environments welcoming and inclusive as well. So let's celebrate Pride together. And of course, I cannot do this without my fellow volunteer, Nikki Borova. Hello, Nikki.
Hello, my love. How are you? Are you surviving?
The heat wave in the UK is killing me, and that's coming from a Greek. But I think we can make it happen.
Oh, I'm glad. Yeah, we're here to celebrate Pride.
Absolutely. And I want to introduce your banner. Now,
thank you.
Nikki, what are these pronouns?
So this is and you've got my maiden name in there. Amazing. These are the Czech pronouns. So Ona is she and Její is her. So that's, I suppose, in Czech, how you'd say it, Ona and Její. So those are the pronouns. What are your pronouns, Georgia? Do you have them in Greek? Do you use them in some way?
That's a very good question. That's what I was trying to find out before online. I was trying to look at how we express our pronouns in Greek, which is very interesting. I saw different responses online. I'm not sure if it is that common. So if anyone from Greece is watching us, please correct me if I'm wrong. But I can show you mine, for instance. So we do say, I know it's all Greek to you.
Yes.
So we would say, for example, αυτή or tin to show the feminine pronouns. But you know what struck me is that the word αυτή, she, we wouldn't really use it in sort of, it has got a lot of a social negative connotation, because we'd say, oh, her, the.
That's interesting, Georgia. And does it work the same way with the male pronoun he? Is that also like negative? If you said he,
yes.
It is.
Yeah,
okay.
It can be negative at times. Yeah, it depends on how you say it. Like, of course.
Wow.
Yes.
And how do you pronounce the second one? You have afti and
tin.
Tin.
Yeah. Yes.
Nice.
Yes. So her.
I
need to look it up a little bit more. But this is part of our inclusive journey, isn't it? Nikki, we always invite every year different guests from around the world to come and share their ideas. Our Pride show last year was beautiful, gorgeous stories. But I want to start by asking you first. So how do you make sure that the people around you feel inclusive, warm and welcome?
I think I'm very lucky to work in a very inclusive environment. I think I don't notice necessarily a lot of work needed. I'm very lucky to be working on the degree program with students in their 20s, and they're very aware and they're very inclusive. So I learn a lot from them. And, you know, they're just aware of language and how language can be sometimes hurtful or harmful. And so they're very respectful. And inclusion, I don't know, maybe I'm being really naive, but it just feels like, you know, it's a really welcoming environment where everyone is there and included, and everyone is quite mindful. So I'm very lucky, very lucky. How about you, Georgia? What's it like there in Cambridge? Are you lucky too?
Absolutely. And I've always felt that ELT, regardless of the materials that we use, regardless of different backgrounds where we teach, I've always felt that ELT is an industry where people from different backgrounds, different countries, different personalities, different identities, they can come in a place and make friends with one another, and it comes out so naturally.
Yeah.
That you don't even think about it sometimes, which can be both something beautiful, but it can also be a curse, because at some point you're sort of thinking, sure, I don't do anything because the students do everything themselves, but can I encourage it? Can I welcome it somehow? So yeah, these are the questions that we are asking ourselves today. And of course, we can start with our first guest. Nikki,
Yeah.
are you ready?
I'm ready. Is Tyson ready?
Now, this guest of ours, I must say, this is one of the first people that guided me through my inclusive materials journey, because I'm a PowerPoint girly. I like creating my own materials, I like putting things in nice PowerPoints with beautiful animations. But at some point, I felt that something was missing. And the book, Inclusive Materials, How to Write Inclusive Materials, was one of the books that, well, the first book that I actually got in my hands. And I'm not going to say anything else. I'm going to leave you two, and I'm just going to welcome to the stage Tyson Seaburn. Hello, Tyson.
Hello. Hello.
Hi.
Happy Pride.
Yeah,
Happy
happy Pride to you. Tyson, tell us about your pronouns. What are we looking at here?
So we're looking at il, elle, and he, which are, I would say French would probably be my second language. But it's at the beginning here, and English is at the end, and Portuguese is in the middle. And I do this for a variety of reasons. But the main one is to decenter English, because we don't always need English to be forefront in everything that we do. Other languages deserve the same value. And so there's pronouns in all sorts of them. And I thought I would choose the ones that I like to speak the most.
That's very cool. And it's, do you know what, that's a nice icebreaker as well, isn't it? To use with people, as we were doing before the show started. Like, oh.
Yeah, sure. I mean, it got you to put yours in chat as well, so it's a good little learning thing.
It is. Absolutely. And my love, we were just saying before the show that it's actually 2 years. Is it 2 years today that we
exactly.
were?
Yeah, it's our anniversary, Nikki.
Yeah. Happy 2 years, Tyson.
Thank you. Yes. Just to finish that thought, it's 2 years ago that we were doing this together, this Pride celebration on IATEFL Live as well, just in case listeners don't know what we're talking about.
Oh, yeah, sorry. Yeah, context. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So Tyson, I think just first of all, it's lovely to have you here and to see you. Like, obviously, I saw you at IATEFL and we had a little tiny catch up. What I was going to ask you was, it is Pride Month, and in 2026, what does Pride mean for you? What is it to celebrate Pride now?
I think it's as much a protest as it ever was. Pride didn't start out as a celebration. It started out as a protest for our rights, for the way that LGBTQ community was being treated, specifically by the police, but more broadly by organizations and work and things like that. And I think we're in times now where, unfortunately, the tide has turned politically in some countries to where it's less inclusive than it was, say, 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 years ago. And as a result, Pride now means even more to me, because we have to continue being out in the open. We have to continue showing people what inclusive practices means, and that is still important and especially important in today's climate.
Okay. And what? So for you and your environment, I'm going to be presumptuous, but I assume that you and we're working in environments where we haven't gone backwards. I don't think, at least I don't feel in the Czech Republic. But what does it mean in your kind of work environment and to
well, I would
inclusion? Sorry,
I would. That's okay.
The connection's okay.
A little bit wonky. I would say I am fortunate because I work in a university environment in Canada, in Toronto specifically, and therefore diversity, inclusion, equity, and justice are continuing to be forefront in the discourse at the university. And as a result, you'll see lots of places where there are rainbow flags or trans flags or bisexual flags and all sorts of different affirming spaces. So in that regard, I'm in a kind of bubble, you might say, which is great for me because not only am I queer, but also it allows me to continue the kind of work and advocacy that I do without really worrying too much about how it's going to be perceived by my colleagues or the people whom I work with more broadly at the university. But having said that, we're not immune, Canadian in Canada, to the discourse that has been happening and the empowerment that has been happening to another group of people who just laugh at everything that's queer related or try to put us down or try to instill fear, in different members of the community. And so I'm cognizant that happens here too. And we really just anywhere need to be diligent and steadfast in our approach to inclusive practices. And make it not something that just fades into the background. Because once that happens, it's going to be really challenging to return from that. And I think that we have a duty and a responsibility as educators to make sure that we don't ever just let inclusive practices sort of fall to the side.
And it's super important as well in terms of as individuals, human beings, kind of your identity, your authenticity. We can't be anybody else in the classroom or in our workspace other than we are. And it's it's heartbreaking to think that people are potentially hiding themselves. I mean, what would you say to anybody that feels that they have to, and how, anything to help with perhaps their well-being and just I don't know.
Well, that's a hard one, aside from the fact that I've been there, right? Because it wasn't always like this. I had a long time where I felt like I needed to hide who I was in the classroom or at work, because I grew up in the 90s and I was an adult, relatively late in the 90s. And so times were different even then. And so it was much harder to talk about your personal life in class the same way a straight, heterosexual, cisgender person might, just off the cuff, But now I feel more like who cares about being concerned about that anymore? I can't be anybody but myself, and I want to show to my learners that they too can be themselves. And so the best way to do that is for me to do it as well. So I don't know how to exactly
absolutely
express
100%.
to everybody else who is hiding, because everybody's context is a little bit different, and certainly I can't say 100% you have to be out and proud no matter what environment you are in. Obviously, you have to figure out that for your own safety and on your own timeline and so on. All I can say is that other people like myself have been there, and it is better when you're not. I can honestly say that. It's much better for your mental health when you are who you are.
Yeah, 100%. And as you said, we can't be anybody else. We are who we are, and in no way should we hide that or be embarrassed. What brings you hope, Tyson? Is there anything you think, there is hope for the future of diversity or inclusion in our workspace? What fills you with joy?
A lot of young people, honestly, because increasingly, I teach largely mainland Chinese student body. They're in person, but they're largely from there. And as you can imagine, that has been one of the more conservative places historically in terms of their approach to queerness. But I have noticed in the last 5 years specifically how much more proud and outgoing the queer community is, even among my own students. And they'll just talk about themselves as though it's nothing. And that gives me some hope, because obviously that's the goal. That's what you want. And if a country that comes from a conservative mindset can make this shift and make these changes themselves, then I feel like, there's hope for everybody. Look at Poland as another example, or Hungary, right? They've made strides in terms of LGBTQ rights very recently. And you might never would have thought that was going to happen, but the tides turn, they shift back and forth. And the fact that I see this shift gives me a lot of hope, especially with the younger ones. Not to mention, IATEFL's doing, obviously I'm a part of IATEFL, but we are doing this live Pride. That's a great thing. That wasn't always the case. And, lots of different people are writing books and materials and stuff like that about inclusive stuff. So I'm super happy about that.
Which is, well, talking about material, I'm going to say the word workbook to you. And if anybody is listening and not sure what we're talking about, can you help us, Tyson? What is it? What is workbook?
100%. Yes. And it's workbook. So look at the word in your brain, and then I'm going to tell you it's WERK, not WORK. And if you listen to it's a podcast, and if you listen to the podcast, you'll sort of understand a little bit more why I've chosen the word and the spelling with an E as opposed to O. But in any case, I was finding as a materials writer myself that because there's so little queer inclusion in our materials, it's up to teachers for the most part to supplement or to create materials that have more belonging in them. So we all do this to some extent, and some better than others, and some with training and some without training, and so on and so forth. But one of the hard parts of doing that is having authentic stories and authentic audio and knowing where that's actually coming from, especially as someone outside the queer community. It can be a little challenging, I think, for some teachers to source this material and feel confident that in fact it represents really well and so on. So I decided, hey, you know what? I'm queer, I'm an educator, I'm a materials writer. Why don't I get a whole bunch of us together and do some interviews with queer ELT folks about their experiences being queer? Not necessarily about their teaching experience or what it's like in the classroom or anything, just in general, and see what commonalities and what differences we all have growing up queer or being queer in different countries and different contexts, and how that's impacted our educational life, but also our healthcare, our family life, and get some real, authentic, raw stories. So, there's no censorship in this podcast. And what can derive from that then is audio and video that can be used in the classroom, which has real, authentic queer language being used, as well as experiences that you aren't going to get necessarily in your typical course book. So that's sort of the impetus for it. And so I put out a call a few years ago for queer ELT folks, and I got 10 great people who were involved. And every episode now is focusing on one of them and their experiences. And we're right halfway through the season at the moment, so it's a good time to subscribe. And you can do that at any of the podcasting platforms you want. But if you can't find them, Seaburnt with a T at the end, that's the Tyson part, seaburnt.substack.com is sort of a starting point maybe. But anyway, long story short is it's a really engaging set of narratives about queer experiences by ELT folks. Very authentic, very raw, very real, and perfect for use in the classroom. And we're going to be making materials to supplement the podcast episodes as well. That'll be sort of a second phase. But right now, you can just enjoy the podcast.
That's brilliant. So hang on. So it sounds really great that you can bring that into the classroom, and also if you yourself are interested in hearing other people's journeys, it's useful and nice to listen to, I suppose. So are there 10 episodes, or is it a bit more than that?
So there are going to be 12 episodes for this season. The first 2 were about coming out. So Taylor Vega, who is in Brazil, she and I are co-hosts, and we just talk about the derivation of coming out, what it means, what the implications are, the lexical aspect of the word coming out, and so on, for 2 episodes. And then after that, we talk with Chad Langford, who is an American and now lives in France. In episode 4, we talked to Guy Chetin, who is from Turkey. In episode 5, we talked to Annie Perfler, who's from Brazil. In episode 6, which is the most recent one, Ethan Trin, who's from Vietnam. So we're getting not only queer experiences, but a wide variety of them as well, from different parts of the world, as well as accents and lots of different things that we're centering, as opposed to just your typical me, for example.
Yeah, I know what you mean. Brilliant. Okay, so if anyone's interested, they can go to any of the platforms that have podcasts and find the workbook with an E, or go to cburnt@substack.com.
Yeah, more or less. You'll find it. Yep.
Perfect. Okay. Well, this is great to know. And Tyson, just, I suppose, a question to finish. If there was a manager, a teacher, a colleague, anybody who wanted to do one thing tomorrow in order just to kind of aid inclusion or make people feel seen and heard, what piece of advice might you give them?
I would say you need to listen to people, to queer folks. That's the number one thing. So when we talk about what we need and what will make things better and how to rearrange policy or update things in order to make things more inclusive, we're the ones who know how that is. And so putting up any barriers or resistance but what about this or what about that? Those aren't the right answers. The answer is, I hear what you're saying. I'm going to try to do what you're saying. We'll do everything we can. And so that spills over into listening to your queer colleagues or your queer teachers and staff, but also your students. Also, just doing the homework on your own. Go listen to queer people on YouTube or anywhere talk about what they need. And that will be a huge improvement, I would say.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. For life in general as well, just listen.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, 100%.
And I was going to ask as well, does anything happen at your uni to celebrate Pride, or is it just always inclusive, so you don't really necessarily need to just celebrate that?
Well, that's a good point. It is more integrated all the way around, but they had the rainbow flag and trans flag raising at the beginning of June. There are a few different Pride events throughout the month. I can't name specifically what they all are, but there was an Ask a Trans Person Pride event recently. There's different coffee socials. I belong to one called QT, which is QUTE, which is a social group at the university that meets for lunch and has coffees and stuff like that. So there's a variety of things. It's not just one thing, and I do think that that's the way to go. But
that's
certainly the flag raising, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. But and are you instrumental in setting up these social events, or is this the organization itself? That's amazing.
No, yeah. I have my own advocacy, and I'm well known within IATEFL for this particular thing. But there's so many people doing stuff and work that inspires what I do as well. And the university is a good example of that, because we have whole departments that are on sexual diversity and they're not course departments, but they're departments for human resources about how to include people better and what type of policies to make and to improve the university. And in fact, there was one for a year long where the university was updating its inclusive practices policies that had been written, say, in 2018. And it was soliciting advice from every colleague anywhere on the university who wanted to give advice in order for them to actually collect authentic ideas and do this major revision, which is coming out next year. So, like I said, I'm afforded a really good environment to actually work in to promote this.
Yeah, I get it. That's wonderful. And I'm really in favor of these social events, because I can imagine as a student, if you don't really know anybody and you're feeling a bit, I don't know if I belong, then this can really help.
Yeah, queer straight alliances have been a thing for a long time, even in high schools here. And so or LGBTQ straight alliance, whatever you want to call it. It's a great opportunity for kids to get together and to actually, talk about how their experiences are being affected one way or the other. And just queer space in general is so important. I just talked about this recently on the episode of Workbook, that the importance of queer space, and by that I mean a space where only queer people are, and purposefully set up, is so important, because the things you talk about amongst queer people don't come up amongst queer people and straight people when they're talking, because there's just no reason to talk about those things. Straight people and queer people don't have the same experiences all the time, and as a result, you don't always know what to ask in order to get the most out of a queer person. So when you have queer people all together, there's just this camaraderie and this shared experience that you feel so much more like you belong in this case, because everybody knows what to ask each other and everybody knows how to sort of relate to each other. And so having those spaces in an educational environment are tip-top ideas for not only colleagues but for the learners themselves. So
100%. I'm impressed that the organisation is so forward-thinking to actually set that up, because I can imagine, the students or maybe staff, I don't know, might try and initiate that, but for it to come so top-down, I think that's very progressive.
Yeah, well, it's both, right? Because top-down exists, bottom-up is allowed to flourish. And I think that when you do bottom-up only, it's more resistant between the two entities. And it's much, much better if organizations and associations and policymakers and leaders, I'm a leader in this program myself, use that power in order to create the foundational environment to allow the bottom-up kind of organizations to take hold and so on. Because, yes, it's great to have an organization create the social spaces and so on and so forth, but then most of the time those leaders are straight people, well-meaning, but don't necessarily know the right way to do everything. So when they create the environment, that feels like everything's okay to have the queer people organize themselves, then that, helps this bottom-up stuff from happening. And I think that that's actually the better of the two, rather than everything be top-down. It would be much better to have bottom-up stuff. I mean, that's a language learning principle, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Do you know what, Tyson? I think anyone watching this, I think they've just learned quite a lot from you, from what you've just said, because it seems like a obvious, really great idea, but it takes someone to say, do you know what, we need these spaces, and all we need to do is organise it for it to happen. So yeah, I think that's absolutely brilliant. Absolutely
cool.
Brilliant.
So happy. Yeah.
Oh, thank you very much, my love. Well, it's been, as always, an absolute pleasure talking to you and listening to your ideas and what you have to say, definitely. And maybe next year we can celebrate our 3-year anniversary of chatting to each other.
I hope so. Well, happy Pride, everybody at IATEFL. And I hope that you celebrate it loudly and proudly.
Absolutely. All right, my love. Thank you very much. It was lovely to talk to you.
What an incredible interview. Tyson and Nikki, thank you so much for joining us. And I took a lot of notes, I must say, during the interview, because as I said before, it is very important for someone like me, for example, who is straight, a cis woman, to learn from people, not only from the industry, but people from the wider educational sector, how we can create more inclusive environments. And hearing those stories, hearing about different action points and advice that we can, anything that we can do is absolutely incredible. So Tyson and Nikki, thank you so much for that interview. And now, as I said before, Tyson's book, How to Write Inclusive Materials, and his new podcast workbook are part of my resources that I always suggest. However, there is another resource that I have recently discovered, and I was very grateful to be able to review it firsthand, and that was Ben Goldstein's 30 Ideas on Inclusion in ELT by Cambridge University Press and Assessment. So please join me in welcoming Ben Goldstein. Hello, Ben.
Hi, how are you? Thank you, Georgia, for that. And thank you for inviting me.
Now, Ben, you have got on page 4 of the book, I think you mentioned before, you have got an activity on how to break the ice.
Page 24, yeah. The
24.
idea of the idea that we had with Tyson of putting the pronouns after your name. So I don't know if anyone can guess my pronouns there, but I live in Catalonia, in near Barcelona. And so A, which the double L is pronounced like a Y, would be he, and the 3 he's actually. So that would be in Catalan, then L is in Spanish, and then he obviously in English. And as Tyson said, this is one way of decentering English, but it's also a way of finding out about your learners' other languages. Because we now live in a much more plurilingual world where people are proficient in different languages, and so that's getting people to write their pronouns that way could be a fun way to get to know each other. Yeah, breaking the ice in some way.
It definitely broke the ice backstage when we're getting ready for the show.
Yeah.
Because as I was saying before, I just discovered how in different languages we can express our pronouns, and how I found it difficult, for example, in Greek to do that. So that is absolutely beautiful. That's such a great activity already.
Yeah, it's in the chapter in the book. This is my book, 30 Ideas on Inclusion, that you mentioned, and it's chapter 6, using inclusive language. So it's one of the tips for using personal pronouns.
Ben, apart from the book that we're going to revisit in a second, for those of us joining us from around the world and who may not know you yet, could you tell us a little bit about yourself and your journey in ELT?
Sure, yeah. Well, I'm 60 now, and so I've been around quite a long time. I'm from London originally. I moved to Spain when I was 24 years old, so I've been here most of my life. And I became a language teacher. I worked for the British Council in Madrid, and then I worked in Andalusia in a university language school for many years. In fact, I worked in the same university language school for 10 years. And then I started to write materials. And I've written a number of different course books for different publishers. I think informed largely by that experience of those 10 years, of classroom experience. I just created lots of materials during that time, and I realized, well, why don't I try and see if I can make these available to other people, and that's how it all started.
And then back.
And then since then, I've done some. So those are all the course books for adults and teenagers, and then I've also written methodological handbooks for teachers. So this is the third one on inclusion. I wrote one on images back in 2008 for Cambridge, and then another one on digital video, and then inclusion is the latest one.
I see. And now, if we look at materials writing and looking back over your career, how has inclusion changed in materials writing within that sector of ELT? What improvements have been made?
Well, there've been a great deal of improvements, certainly considering, when I started writing 25 years ago, everything was very white Anglo-Saxon Protestant, and middle class and aspirational. And now all publishers have their EDI guidelines and so on. But there is so much more that should be done. Definitely, we haven't come anywhere near far enough. And that's precisely why Tyson was talking about why he created the workbook, because material like that, it's not possible for the big international publishers to create material with those authentic voices, and that has been a great frustration for me for many years, and it is it is hard. The big publishers still won't publish local. They could do more to publish localized versions. I understand that the international list, let's say, the international course books have to be quite sanitized and quite safe because of the certain markets, but they could, I think, produce more material which was really truly inclusive. But I'm still fighting for that. But it's not easy, and we've come a long way, but we have a long way to go.
Absolutely. We keep mentioning the word inclusion, and inclusion is everywhere at the moment, especially during Pride Month as well. What does it mean to you actually?
It is a huge term, and it's also it means so many different things to so many different people in so many different contexts. But I think it's to do with the other. I think for me, it's to do with recognizing, respecting, and learning from the other, from the one who is different from you. And I think that's probably the let's say the most humanistic way I can think of putting it. I mean, there are lots of other ways of defining inclusion, which is this whole idea of the fact that we all have barriers to learning. Yes, the concept of barriers is very important. Anticipating those barriers, recognizing them, and fighting to remove them. But this, I think this can be quite abstract in some cases. And so I think the idea of recognizing and respecting and learning from the other is the most powerful way that I can think of defining inclusive practice.
I like that a lot. But at the same time, I have this fear that whatever I do, or a lot of educators might have the same fear as mine, that whatever we do might turn out wrong. So how can we avoid this feeling?
I think there's a problem with inclusive practice that teachers fear. I think it's unnecessarily mystified sometimes. A lot of what I consider to be inclusive is actually, I think well, let me put it this way. I think a lot of what teachers already do in the classroom is inclusive, but they don't recognize that it is. In other words, just to give you an example, we've been talking about intercultural awareness for years, right? Making students aware of other cultures, getting students to talk about their own culture, empowering them to reflect on their own culture in English and so on. This is a fundamentally inclusive practice. So I think I would turn what you just said on its head, and I say, rather than focusing on, oh God, I'm not being inclusive enough, I'm not including enough people, I'm feeling insecure about it. I think we need to break down inclusive practice and demystify it, because I think a lot of what language education is about is already inclusive. I've just given that example of intercultural awareness, but using the students L1 or using their own languages, again, which is something that has become very, very fashionable since the Common European Framework. This is highly inclusive as well. Peer learning, encouraging peer learning, listening to the learner, giving the learners choice. All of these concepts, all of these central ideas are not in themselves new, but we can frame them in an inclusive way. See what I mean?
Yes.
And I think we should give ourselves more credit that actually a lot of what we do is inclusive already. And I think it's dangerous to say to teachers, are you ready for the challenge to include everyone and to understand everyone's marginalized identity and all this kind of thing? I think that's the wrong approach. I think we need to go in the opposite way and encourage teachers to feel that what they're doing is already inclusive. That doesn't mean that there isn't more to learn, but I do think we need to demystify inclusive practice.
I like this idea a lot, and especially the fact that what you mentioned, that we are already doing a lot of things that we don't realize. However, again, I am going to be the voice of fear, because I think that needs to be heard in a way, because sometimes I'm thinking, oh, but there's no budget, or the policy says otherwise. So my sort of question to you is, what can we do that doesn't require additional budgets or policy changes, for example?
I don't think being inclusive, adopting an inclusive practice requires those things at all. I think what Tyson said at the end, when you asked the question, in fact, he stole my answer to that question, which is listen attentively to your learners. That doesn't require any of these external factors. What is important in an institution is that the institution is inclusive. So it's all very well preaching about inclusive practice in the classroom, but if the way that teachers are recruited, for example, or that how the organization is structured, it's not hierarchical or whatever, this is fundamental. I've seen again and again people talking about how important it is to be inclusive, and yet they're working within environments and institutions which in many aspects are not inclusive in terms of the way that teachers are recruited. That's just one example. So I think that's a very, very, very important thing to consider.
And based on your experience, how are you finding inclusion with younger generations?
Well, I think, like going back to what Tyson said, I think we can be more optimistic. So the downside of what I was saying is that let's say in international ELT publishing, not as much is, we need to do far more. On the other hand, we are seeing, I do think in many countries and many cultures, a much more open attitude. And I think this is very positive. It's certainly easier for me to talk about this topic now than it was, certainly 10 years ago, and definitely 5 years ago. But you do have to respect these cultural considerations because, inclusion, it can mean so many different things in so many different places. And therefore, it's very important not to go in there with your agenda and say, this is how we all must understand inclusion. And so you do have to bear in mind the local context always and have that sensitivity.
Absolutely. And this is what I liked about your book as well, because you have at the end of the book your personal note.
Yeah.
And I found this very, very interesting because I'm all about personal stories as well. So based on your experience with, for example, your career or your personal life or your travels, how do you find inclusion in different contexts? How easy is it to learn about inclusion in different contexts?
I think it could be a lot easier. This is what I mentioned about trying to demystify it. I think a lot of the problem, and I mentioned this in the final chapter of the book, a lot of the problem is the word inclusion itself. So the problem with the term inclusion is that for me, and I think this is why it's a barrier for a lot of teachers, is this idea of kind of ticking the box. Now, I have to include X, Y, and Z, and that's how to be an inclusive teacher. So I have to be an expert in ADHD. I have to be an expert in the needs of refugees. I need to be an expert in LGBTQI identity. No, it's not about that. For me, I take a holistic approach. So a whole person. So rather than a label-led approach, this student is X, this student is Y. So this person is a person with multiple identities. And then you move away from this idea of having to include this minority and this minority and this minority, because we're all multifaceted. We all have multiple identities. And then I seem to be able to connect with teachers if I actually sometimes remove the word inclusion and talk about belonging, because everybody knows what it feels like to belong, to have a sense of belonging. Whereas inclusion has this idea of a kind of, let's say somebody in a position of power, including somebody else. And I think it's problematic as well, because you can be physically included, but still not feel like you belong. right?
Mhm.
So I find that, taking a long time to answer your question, but I find that connecting with teachers about inclusive practice, one of the ways I find that's useful is to actually unpack the term inclusion and make the idea sense of belonging our end goal. That's not to say we shouldn't be using the word inclusion, no. But we need to understand, I think, that the end goal of inclusive practice is that students have a sense of belonging, that they have a sense that they matter, that they can see themselves in the classroom, in the materials, that they're visible, that they are listened to. And I think that going down that path is a way to make it more accessible.
And in your context, is there anything that you like doing in order to encourage this feeling?
Well, I think going back to listening to your learners it sounds very easy, but it's such an important thing. I'll tell you one just very quick anecdote. I think it was the moment I realized that inclusion was something that I wanted to be, what I wanted to follow, and I wanted to be research into. I was working in Hong Kong for the British Council, and I went into one class of secondary teenagers, and at that time, that was about 15 years ago, all of the students had English names, which they were they were happy to adopt, and from the logistical point of view, it did make it easier for the teacher. At that time, 15 years ago, I didn't even think about the colonialist, kind of agenda, and the idea of, why are these kids adopting English names? This is not a British colony anymore. I wasn't kind of even thinking about that. But one day I was reading the register. I did a substitution class. I had to go across town to another school that I hadn't been to before. I read out the register, and there was one boy. There were 16-year-old kids, I think they were. There was one boy. I was reading out the register, and it had all these English names, and he came, and it had a transcription of his Chinese name, his Cantonese name. And I said, "You don't have an English name?" And he said, "No, I don't want an English name." And it was a very, very interesting moment in the class, because the teenagers, you can imagine, a lot of them were like laughing at him. They were, in a sense, in essence, they were excluding him because he didn't have an English name. And that peer pressure and everything. And I said, "Why don't you want to have an English name?" I said, "No, well, I like my name. This is me. This is my identity, and I don't want to adopt an English name. Simple as that." And I didn't like the atmosphere that caused, with the teasing. And the next day in class, I made a point before reading the register. I'm going to let it go. But then the next day, I thought I had to go back to do the substitution. And I read out, I said, "Now everybody just accept the fact that this boy doesn't want to have an English name, okay? It's his choice, and we should respect that." And it was great, read out the register, and nobody said anything. And I think at that moment, I realized that I was interested in this field. And I think that was, what was that? That was me as a teacher responding to the here and now, and listening to the learner. There's no way that you could stop and say, no, I'm sorry, but for me, I find Chinese names, Cantonese names confusing. Do you think you could adopt a name for me? Could you imagine? I would imagine in those days that would have been the response of some teachers in those days. But I think that I often tell that story as a way that I became interested in inclusion, and also as an example of listening to the learner.
And such a good story as well, because I agree with you. Listening to the learner is a very important aspect of understanding, starting the conversation as well. Now, then, before we say goodbye, this is a question that we always like asking our guests. This is a question that you have already answered by saying that listening is a very good first step. But going back again to your experience, what would you say is something that you would encourage people watching us from home to do if they want to start having a more inclusive environment?
Mm. I think listen is, as we've covered, but ask the learners for their preferences. Give them choice. Allow them that space, which is kind of a similar thing. But for example, it may be sometimes the whole, we spoke about inclusive language, the whole idea of how does a student, let's say a student who is with autism, how would they like to be referred to if I'm talking about this person to another third party, a person with autism, an autistic person. So person-led language or identity-led language. These kinds of choices, sometimes this kind of language, these decisions are made for. It seems like they're made for us by academics in universities who say, oh, we can't use this term or we can't use that term because of whatever reason. Yeah. And actually, they haven't actually bothered to ask the person concerned how they would prefer to be called. Isn't it? Respecting their choice and their preferences. If you have any doubt at all about, I just used the example of how would they like to be referred to, but it could be anything. Where would you like to sit? Where would you prefer to? Who would you prefer to work with, and so on? Would you prefer to have this material, delivered in this way or that way? And just making that part of the discourse, making those questions, and that, because I think inclusive practice at the end of the day is really about curiosity and sensitivity to learner differences. And so those questions that I think that just mentioned, I think they should be always in the back of your mind if you're not sure about how to be with a learner, a particular learner. And this is going back to what we said before, this idea of the importance of being yourself as well. Yes. And encouraging your learners to be themselves, their true selves. This is one way to do that.
Absolutely. Ben, this has been wonderful. Now, one last question before we say goodbye. I keep saying that, but I really enjoyed talking.
Yeah, that's okay. It's all right. No problem. No problem.
How do you celebrate inclusion, pride? How do you celebrate it with the people around you?
Well, it's funny. I am a gay man, and it's interesting that talking about labels. I guess I'm of a slightly different generation to Tyson, so because I speak about this in the book as well. This idea of, and this again is absolutely your choice. So I find myself never referring to myself as queer, but always as gay. But I guess it could be a generational thing. Whatever. These are all personal decisions. But I don't. It's not that I don't believe in celebrating pride. Of course I do. But I feel that we should have these moments, these days, this time of the year to acknowledge the importance of the community and of respecting the community. But I think it's something, inclusive practice for me is all pervasive and permeates everything. It's not just an extra. And so for me, wouldn't necessarily do anything different today than I would do every day of the year. Do you see what I mean? Absolutely. That I think we need to think of it not as like a special thing or an extra thing, but that this is something I need to be aware of at all times.
Yes, absolutely. Well, Ben, thank you so much. It's been wonderful to talk with you. And I hope to see you again soon.
Yeah, thank you very much, Georgia, for the invitation, and happy Pride, everybody. Enjoy this month of June.
Thank you so much, Ben. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
And we're back with a pre-recorded video. This interview happened with a lot of happiness and a lot of energy and a lot of excitement. And this is because in my effort to get to know a lot of people from our inclusive communities in general, I came across this person online, and I'm very excited to welcome her in. And please help me inviting Paige Bull. Hello, Paige.
Hi.
Or should I say good morning?
Good morning is wonderful.
Thanks. Thank you so much for making the time today, and thank you so much for joining us. I know that it's very early where you are. So where are you and what time is it?
So I am in Morgantown, West Virginia, and it is around 8:04 in the morning in the US.
There you go. Whereas in the UK, it's 1:04, which is absolutely crazy.
Yes.
So, Paige, for the people watching us from home, could you please let us know who you are?
Yeah, so my name is Paige. I'm originally from Alabama, which is a southern state here in the US, but as I mentioned, currently live in Morgantown, West Virginia. And in between those two places, I've lived in the UK. I did my master's in Leeds. I spent a little over 10 years in Colombia teaching English, and now I live here with my wife, our two cats. I love to garden. I'm a nature nerd. I also love fun facts. People around me, I think, sometimes get tired of hearing them, but I think everyone can use a good fun fact every now and then. So,
Oh, fantastic. Can we hear one fun fact?
So one I really like to tell, which I think is, I don't know, just interesting. I love wombats. Okay. I've never met a wombat. My dream one day is to go to Australia and meet a wombat. But wombats have square poop. And I think that is fascinating. They're one of the only animals that has that. And theory goes that it's because of the pressure in their intestines and it's not equalized. And so, yeah, I don't know if that's the fun fact you were expecting, but that's what I like to tell.
It's a brilliant fun fact. I love it.
All right, there we go.
You've worked in several countries and cultures. And what I want to ask you is how these experiences have shaped the way you think about inclusion and belonging.
Yeah, it's a good question. So just for anyone listening in, I've worked in the US. I've worked with through Title III support, which essentially is support for multilingual learners in the public school systems. When I was living in England, I also worked with Chinese students who were hoping to go to university in the UK. I worked with Spanish and Italian students at the K-12 level who were doing English summer camps, and also adult refugees who were assimilating and getting established in the UK. And then spent 10 years in Colombia working with university students learning English, and then also worked on several projects with the US Embassy in Brazil, supporting Indigenous and BIPOC communities in the Amazon region of the country. And I think that across all of these different experiences, there's been a lot that I've learned, being a newbie, or some may even be, say like an outsider in these places. And I think living in these places and building these communities with people who share different cultures and different linguistic backgrounds and different lived experiences really just taught me the importance of creating, building, participating in communities. And I think that, you can find a lot of differences and you can have a lot of feelings about I don't fit in, or, I don't share, my lived experiences with the people that are around me. But I think that you can find things that connect you and build those relationships and those connections. And so I think it's really taught me that inclusion and belonging are two-way streets. You can't just expect to automatically feel included and like you belong. I think that would be ideal, and maybe sometimes you do, right? But I think that it often takes work and effort on your part too, not just expecting that you will find those sentiments wherever you are.
I like the fact that you mentioned community, and especially the fact that it's a two-way street, as you mentioned. Because we do want people to feel truly seen. So was there a moment in your career when you felt truly seen and accepted for who you are? And how did you notice what made it powerful for you?
Yeah, it's a great question too. I think there's maybe two moments that stand out. One was when I was working at the university in Columbia. I was asked to participate in a video for our human resources department, and the video was aimed at supporting employees through. We had like a family benefits program, and the video really wanted to demonstrate how all different types of families were really thought about for the program. And I was asked to participate with my wife and our nieces. And I felt like it was the first time that, quote unquote, my type of family had been intentionally recognized or highlighted in a place of work in a way that was really positive, that intentionally fostered inclusion and belonging, because it was part of this wider conversation at the university from our HR department that focused on, supporting a broader range of families, whether that was single folks with pets, married folks with pets, same-sex couples, et cetera, just kind of opening, the door to let folks know that all different types of families exist within our university community, and they can all find support and benefits through this program. And then I think the second one that I would highlight is more of from my role as an educator. And I had a student one time come and tell me that they really appreciated just like my authentic existence in the classroom, sharing about who I was and about my family in a really normal way, because they said that it gave them the courage to really be who they were, and that they felt like otherwise, not having had this example, they weren't sure that how comfortable they would have felt just kind of leaning into and becoming the person that they were meant to be, or that they always were. And so it helped them realize that it was possible to be queer and lead what many consider to be like a normal professional life. And so I think both of those moments are ones that really, really stand out to me.
Absolutely. And I'm glad you mentioned these two examples, because when Pride Month comes and I want to do something inclusive for my school, I'm thinking it's good to celebrate Pride, but what do we do throughout the year? What platforms do we offer our students and our staff as well to feel included, to feel welcome?
Yeah.
So with this in mind, I want to ask you, looking back at the start of your career or looking at where you are now, what advice would you give your younger self? Or your now self?
So I think when I first started working, I was working at a science museum as an outreach educator, and I was still in high school. I think I was like 17. And I was just at the beginning of like truly understanding myself and figuring out my place in the world. It was also the first time that I saw a queer professional in a stable relationship. And so I think if I could go back and talk to that younger self, I would tell her to, never doubt your authenticity. And I think not to let the heteronormativity in the world around you make you feel ashamed or embarrassed to talk about your family or your identity in the same way that your non-queer coworkers or professional colleagues do. I think it took me a bit of time to fully embrace that. And actually, I did that once I was outside the US. I felt like I kind of had to leave this context that I knew to just kind of breathe and take that space and kind of feel that freedom to grow into who I was and then circle back. So I think telling myself that it's okay to do that and to recognize that that's what you need to do and just not doubt the journey and come full circle back to just being authentically you without feeling ashamed or embarrassed.
You see, I see that every day when we have got learners and staff who hide themselves. And it's so hard to provide a space for them to be comfortable because of their experiences and because of their backgrounds. And one of my most powerful moments in my current role is when a few students came out to me because they felt that it was a safe space. So why is then well-being an important part of creating inclusive environments?
Yeah. I mean, I totally understand, why some folks feel like the pressure to hide parts of who they are at work or at school. I think that a lot of people, myself included, maybe when I was younger, feel that they'll be ostracized or judged, or, that maybe even being authentically who they are could jeopardize their career growth or their advancement. But I think it is really important to be able to show up and be who you are authentically, both for yourselves, but also for those around you. Like I just mentioned with my student, when we show up fully as ourselves, I think we provide representation and visibility. And if everyone hides who they are, we lose that, right? I think back to how impactful it would have been for me to have had some sort of queer representation in my life from an earlier age. I didn't, and it was frustrating and challenging, and we could have a whole episode on that. But I think that hiding who you are is also incredibly draining and energy consuming, like guarding your words and thinking through everything you say to make sure that you're filtering out certain things, and just, taking the energy to show up as somebody that you're not, which is why I decided to come out to my parents at 18, because I just couldn't, hide that anymore. And so I think my professional journey has been an interesting one. And I think today, I'm really grateful to work in an environment where I can show up 100% as myself and feel accepted, and that I belong. And I think that knowing and feeling this absolutely affects my productivity, my motivation, my desire to do my job well, but also with joy. I think we often forget this element of joy. And I don't think that you can really show up and work joyfully in a way that you feel really fulfilled if you are not showing up authentically as who you are. Yeah.
You've mentioned a very beautiful word, the word joy.
Yeah.
Which I think is missing from a lot of workplaces and a lot of educational environments. I want to give you one more word.
Yeah.
I want to give you the word hope. So what gives you hope when you think about the future of inclusion?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of things. And I think right now, it can be challenging to find hope, given, I think, a lot of the social and political context of the world, and in the US in particular. But there's several things that make me hopeful. I think one is, when I was growing up, I didn't even hear the word like queer or gay or lesbian or any of these terms until I was, a legal adult, let's say. And I think that nowadays, a lot of younger folks really don't bat an eye at a peer in a same-sex relationship. Like it just feels normal, right? As it should, or the use of pronouns to introduce yourself. And I think while I may be generalizing, that across younger generations, I think the fact that it's something that I observe and I hear and a sentiment that is tangibly visible, I think that that gives me a lot of hope that things are changing for the better. And I think also, I mentioned I live in Morgantown, West Virginia, and we had our first Pride Parade in 2022, and like being here for that was really special, and brought me a lot of hope in that moment. But I think that seeing more and more places like Morgantown, or even smaller places, having their first Pride celebrations and really starting to create these intentional spaces where they want to say, hey, we may be small, we may be rural, like, we're not a Los Angeles or Chicago or New York, but we also are accepting, and we want you to feel like you belong and are included in our communities. I think that also brings me a lot of hope to really see that happening in these places.
That's so nice. And especially when you've told me that you've joined the first Pride in your city, like 2022. Wow.
Yeah.
Incredible. Now, Paige, I'm going to mention a word that is more like a buzzword nowadays, but I want to get your feel. So I'm going to mention the word AI.
Yeah.
Now, with all of these new technologies, and we know that these new technologies can either widen or close gaps.
Mm-hmm.
What is your view? What's your perception about how AI can potentially support diverse learners and educators?
Yeah. So I don't think I've mentioned this yet, but I do work at an AI-based company, and have been working kind of in the AI and education sphere since 2022. And I think that one of the things that I appreciate most about the potential of AI as an educator and lifelong learner as well is the potential and ability to really keep students in productive struggle, but also help educators push students to new levels of learning and exploration while helping education become more equitable overall. And so I think there's a few kind of examples that come to mind that can kind of illustrate this. One being myself, when I was in middle school, I begged my mom, sometimes in tears, to just homeschool me or like let me teach myself because I was incredibly bored, and I lacked the needed, challenge and stimulation, and I wasn't in a productive struggle, I think, most of the time. And I think that AI has the power to change that, right? Like, I want to think that at that moment in time, for whatever reason, maybe my teachers were teaching to the lowest level of mastery that was, present in the students in the class, and didn't have the capabilities or the means to really differentiate and accommodate all these different levels of mastery. I think that still happens today, but I think that AI can help teachers create more diverse and personalized pathways that can allow students like myself to be challenged in, the right way at the right time. So I work at Brisk Teaching, and like we have a student component called Boost, and it facilitates these interactive spaces for learning that really do foster deeper, more critical engagement, whether it's through like brainstorming support or tutoring, or, as a language teacher, I think we all at some point teach a unit on like food and restaurants, right? And I think, I might be teaching a unit on food and restaurants. I can create a character chat where my students are engaging, with an authentic persona in a local context. I can add in all these specifications, but what's really nice is that experience can auto accommodate to each student's level of mastery and give them a space where that interaction is really tailored to their interests, to their language level, to the questions they might have, to their own interests, and just really provide this unique journey. And, if I need that extra push, like I needed and wanted to engage more, I can get that. But if I need to pause and get clarification, I can get that too. And then I think the other thing that comes to mind is when I was working with my students in the Brazilian Amazon, AI was really a tool that helped create more inclusive and also equitable spaces. And it did that by, on the one hand, allowing me as a teacher to create these really custom resources, because you're probably familiar with this, but a lot of materials for language learning tend to be at least slightly generic so that they apply to a really wide group of folks, and they're not hyper contextualized. And so these students weren't going to be able to identify as much with things that were in some of these resources. And so creating these hyper localized resources with the support of AI made all the difference in my classes. And then it also allowed them outside of class time to connect asynchronously and further their learning, especially understanding their context where they're all over the Amazon. It's not like they can just hop on a bus and go to an English language learning center, or, go meet someone in person to practice their skills, or even connect online, because a lot of the time their internet isn't dependable enough for them to connect. And so having an AI powered learning platform that they could use to develop their communicative skills, that was really important in terms of leveling kind of this access to learning. So hopefully those are some good examples to kind of illustrate what I was saying. But feel free to say, Paige, dive in more, because I don't understand.
I think that is definitely another show that we can have together on AI inclusion.
Let's do it.
Absolutely. So I'm happy that you mentioned all of these examples, because the question that I like asking everyone, especially on the Pride show live that we do every year, is, so I take that as an example for myself. For instance, I am a straight cis woman, and when I first entered the classroom, I was thinking, how do I create an inclusive classroom? And I went to different resources. I watch different videos, not only related to language teaching, but education in general, the workplace in general. So what I want to ask you is, for everyone watching from home, what is one action, something that we can do, or a piece of advice, if you'd like, that will help us understand how to make people feel more seen and more valued and more included?
Yeah. I mean, I think the first thing that comes to mind, really based on a lot of my own experience, is just like, be your weird, authentic self. Like, show up exactly as who you are. Let your guard down. I think that if this happens at the leadership level, if it happens, for you as an educator, which, you're kind of leading your classroom, quote unquote, I think it sets a tone and an expectation for those around you that it is okay to show up as who you are. And also, like, you're welcoming that, right? And I think sometimes, when we see people, it feels like they're guarded, or, they're being really closed off, or they're not comfortable. They're not being comfortable in the sense that they aren't showing up just kind of as who they are, right? They're maybe trying to fit into expectations, or do certain things because they think that's what their students want to see, or they think that's what their colleagues want to see. But I think that we really just all need the space and freedom to exist in the world as our full selves. And I think if we're not seeing other folks around us, especially those who are in leadership positions or who are our teachers, for example, I think that maybe we don't understand that it's okay to do that. And sometimes we may think of this as like something so small, or like not doing very much at all. But as my student showed me, and multiple students, we've had conversations around this, I think that this one act can really truly have a deep and lasting impact on your community, whether that's your employees, your coworkers, your students, just kind of everyone in your sphere. If you're comfortable in who you are, I think it makes others feel comfortable in who they are as well. So yeah, that's my one piece.
That is so important, though, and I am going to keep in mind what you said. Be your weird, authentic self.
Yes, please.
Paige, it's been wonderful talking with you. I really love your energy. I really like the way that you talk about what you do. You're full of passion, that show. So thank you so much for joining us today. And I hope you enjoyed the show as well.
Yes, thank you so much for having me. It was truly a pleasure. And yeah, excited for others to join in the conversation.
Absolutely. And who knows, maybe we're going to have that show that we talked about, AI and inclusion.
Yes, I mean, keep my fingers crossed.
Me too. Thank you so much, Paige.